Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor Greg Jefferson,
reporter Brian Chasnoff.
And as we're recording this, it's the beginning of week 2 in Washington, D.C. of the Trump impeachment inquiry. And but in San Antonio, we're dealing with we're dealing with bike lanes and
it's
and
like
bigger than
really
than
I think you could say that. And we've talked about this a lot in recent weeks. The ongoing City Hall drama over bike lanes on Lower Broadway. You had one faction, I guess led by Mayor Ron Nirenberg, that has been committed to the idea of having bike lanes on the lowest, southernmost mile of a 3-mile bond project, where Broadway gets pretty narrow, goes from about 110 feet to 70-some feet. But he's been pushing for that. You've also had Ana Sandoval and Shirley Gonzalez on that side. The other side saying this is not going to work if we're going to do sidewalks and all the other things we want to do there, has been led by the council member from that district, Roberto Trevino. And last week we had kind of a related issue when the council on Thursday voted on approving funding, I guess, or a funding agreement for bike lanes on Avenue B and North Alamo. What happened with that, Josh?
Right, so sort of think of that as kind of like a symbolic vote over whether Broadway is going to get protected bike lanes after all on basically the section that they call Lower Broadway, which is like 35, 281, where that intersects
Right
south all the way down to Houston Street. So basically, the position that Councilman Roberto Trevino favors is, moving the bike lanes over onto Avenue B and Alamo rather than having them go down Broadway. And council voted to give him what he wanted. Mm-hmm. It was a unanimous vote, even from the folks who opposed.
Even Shirley Gonzalez.
Shirley Gonzalez.
Ana Sandoval, they all voted for it.
Ana Sandoval, Ron Nirenberg, all voted in favor of it because
Does nobody know how to protest on this council?
Now, was this a vote for the funding for the protected bike lanes on the side streets? Or
yes.
Okay.
It's basically the $6 million out of the TERS, which is this sort of mechanism to finance sort of public improvements. They took $6 million out of that to finance the construction and design of the Avenue B and Alamo bike lanes. They weren't like explicitly voting on whether Broadway itself will have bike lanes, but it's
now is this really over now, or are they going to try to keep pushing for protected bike lanes on Broadway too?
It's pretty much dead, but there's like a little bit of life in it. It's basically there's sort of this obscure kind of like zoning vote that has to go forward within the next couple of months that would basically put the final nail in the coffin. But
I mean, even if there is just a tiny bit of life left in this issue, I mean, you still have the fact that it looks like you've got 8 council members versus 3. I just don't see how this goes anywhere from here, even though one of the 3 is the mayor.
Right.
It seems like it is effectively dead.
Yeah.
Now, even as you pointed out, this was passed unanimously, but there was some contentious discussion before they voted, wasn't there? I mean, I think Shirley Gonzalez, expressed some unhappiness about the whole Broadway situation. Isn't that right?
It's kind of like how you kind of put it in your column, is that there's sort of this feeling among Shirley Gonzalez, Ana Sandoval, that they ask staff to do something, and staff just kind of ignores them. And I was talking to Assistant City Manager Roderick Sanchez after the vote, and he was saying, like, look, there wasn't any way to do this. It was it would have been impossible to do this, but look, we're gonna. We've been instructed by the city manager to essentially now on, look at every single opportunity to put bike lanes that we possibly can.
And the mechanism that they use, this tax increment reinvestment zone funding, I mean, this was because it wouldn't have been possible to actually use bond money because the bond project was pretty explicit about Broadway. Right.
So even though it said the Broadway corridor, that there was no squishiness in there that you could they could have used it on the side streets?
Well, the some of the squishiness came from the language in the bond language, which was, bicycle amenities and everything else that the bond language included in it, but then a little, almost an asterisk saying as appropriate. So that's kind of like where they found that wiggle room.
Do you think for the cycling advocates, this is sort of, as they say, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory? I mean, they have, no matter what, they've got protected bike lanes now down this entire corridor. And
what's interesting about this is that, you have that sort of unanimous vote because, when it comes right down to it, who's going to vote against protected bike lanes anywhere?
That's right. Yeah, and Shirley Gonzalez, I talked to her a couple of days before because she and Ana Sandoval had been upset about Transportation and Mobility Committee meeting a week before where they wanted to take action and on that item, on the Broadway bike lanes item, and be able to move it to the full council so they could at least have a briefing and a discussion. And there was some question about how the agenda was put together, but she felt that she had been sort of blocked by city staff. Ed Guzman, the deputy city attorney, came up at the end of the meeting and said, "You all can't vote on this. So you can't do that." So it became very contentious. But as upset as Shirley Gonzalez was about that, she did say a couple of days before last Thursday's vote on the issue of Avenue B and North Alamo, she said, "Well, no, I'm not necessarily going to vote against it," because she didn't feel that it was an either or. She felt we could have both. And so I think that could be the argument from some members of the council that, as you said, the more bike lanes we can get, the better.
Right. And they still have to go through this design process of they don't know exactly what it's going to look like either. So they've got basically what they voted for was to amend the contract for Sun Construction. I'm sure I botched that. The name of it.
Sunt.
Yeah, Sunt. Yeah, there we go.
Sunt.
So they gave them, voted to give them, $6 million more to basically factor this into the redesign of the Broadway corridor. So we'll also see what that looks like.
When is construction supposed to start on all this?
Construction's supposed to start on Broadway in February, I believe, but I can't remember when construction's supposed to start on Avenue B and Alamo. I want to say it's either late 2020 or 2021.
Right. Well, on a related subject, something dealing with transportation in San Antonio, last week we had a visit, the editorial board of the Express News had a visit from Mayor Ron Nirenberg, County Judge Nelson Wolff. You had Ray Saldana, who's the chairman of the board for Via Metropolitan Transit, Hope Andrade, who's involved with the Connect SA project. And they were talking about how to get funding for Connect SA and this sort of ambitious transportation plan that they have. And from the beginning of the Connect SA rollout last year, we had heard some talk about the possibility of shifting Aquifer Protection and Linear Creek dollars over to transportation. But in recent weeks, it's gone from being, this might be a possibility that maybe we could get some money from there. Now it has become the firm position of the people on this issue. You got Nelson Wolff a few weeks ago came out and said this is what we have to do, and both he and Ron Nirenberg were making that same point last week. So this would produce $40 million roughly a year, and it would be 1/8 cent sales tax, combination of sales tax from both the Aquifer and Linear Creek programs. Now the thing about this is that these programs expire at the end of 5 years. They have to get voted on every 5 years, and they were last approved in 2015. So this was going to come up for a vote in 2020 anyway. So I think they make the point that we're not taking money away. We're basically, this thing was going to expire. We're going to let the voters decide if they want to put the money elsewhere. As we all know, just the talk of taking money away from Aquifer Protection it's going to be controversial. You've had Annalisa Peace with the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance has said she's adamantly opposed to it. How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, you kind of picked up on this in your column, the fact that you've got your Sunday column. You've got Nelson Wolff, who's taken a really strong position in favor of moving those funds, the sales tax revenue over to VIA. But really, the most important person in that room is going to be Mayor Ron Nirenberg, and whether he can stand stand the heat, because I mean, you're talking about his constituents. I mean, he has been pretty solidly backed by the environmental community, and this is going to fly in the face of what they want. Is he going to have like the intestinal fortitude to stick to his guns?
You know, it would take a lot of heat off of the mayors if the San Antonio River Authority were to. Have you ever heard about this tax? They're floating a property tax that would generate about $45 million annually. That would be used in part to take over these tasks, the conservation easements and the linear creeks.
Yeah.
So, but that's up in the air. That's the.
Yeah, but how real is that?
Well, I think the board votes on it this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's been the question. I think that the argument made from both Nuremberg and Wolf and others is that we're not abandoning those programs. We're saying we think we can get funding elsewhere. Whereas this is pretty much the only place we can go. We were really limited as far as transportation dollars and the program that we want to put together. But I think that if you're an environmentalist in the city, you're nervous about the uncertainty of like whether that money will come from somewhere else.
Yeah, but I mean, the environmental community also has to be worried about mass transit. I mean, that has everything to do with air pollution. You would think that a better funded bus system would be a good thing to them. But I mean, you've also got, going throughout, and this hasn't been really talked about too much, but there's really a class component to this too. I mean, you've got, the environmental community. I'm just going to say, they probably don't ride a lot of buses, probably not. Those who do may not, they may not be so concerned about acquiring, conservation easements over the aquifer. I think they'd rather have more frequent, bus trips. Yeah. So I mean, you've got two kind of class interests that are kind of going at it in a really quiet way.
It's interesting too because this, as you said, Mayor Ron Nirenberg has been, has gotten a lot of support from the environmental community over the years. In 2015, he was one of the people pushing hard to renew the Aquifer Protection Program, and Councilman Ray Saldana, who has been a big advocate for mass transit, I think he was interested 4 years ago in maybe shifting those dollars, but
Nirenberg is someone who just really wants to be liked by everybody in the room, and this is a case where you're gonna tick somebody off, and I think that makes him just phenomenally uncomfortable.
I wish I would have coined this term, but Josh Burdesky, did you read the column he wrote about the Ron flicks?
Yes, I did.
This is a Ron flick.
Well, and I was listening to a recent Conan O'Brien podcast where he had Neil Young on, and telling him how much he envied Neil Young because Neil Young, I can't use the word that, but he was basically, you don't give a bleep, and I wish I was like that. I'm a people pleaser, and I just wish I could be like you because it's clear that you do what you want, and whatever your music tells you to do, you just follow it, and you just don't worry if people don't like you. And every politician has to worry to some degree about being liked, but I think that Nelson Wolff is at a place, and it's probably always been this way, where he doesn't worry too much about it. He's not too consumed with what are people thinking of me, and I think that's more of a challenge for Ron Nirenberg. I think he's always worried a little bit, wouldn't you say?
Oh, a little bit, yeah. I would say it keeps him up at night. It's like, did you see the way that person looked at me at that fundraiser?
He's the Conan O'Brien in this scenario, and Nelson Wolff is the Neil Young. That might be the only time that's ever said. But
exactly.
Well, I thought the point you raised about the increased bus service, being should be a priority for environmental activists was a good one, but I also was reminded of the fact that the council passed this climate action plan that they felt was very diluted at the same time. So I mean, it's like a weird, it's a tricky sort of
and I would also, kind of look back in history a little bit too. So part of this is going to depend on what VIA says it would do with the $40 million.
Right.
I mean, think back to it was Phil Hardberger's first year as mayor. He tried to do a crime control district, basically a sales tax to kind of enhance what the police were doing, and the SAPD released. Or maybe it was the union. It was one of them. They released a kind of a laundry list of what they would spend the money on. It was like T-shirts and stuff like that. And it was totally lampoonable. you could make a joke out of this thing, and it went down to a huge defeat. It just, it's like it got laughed out of the ballot box. So, voters are going to want to know what are you going to do with this money?
Well,
and like VIA's got to have a good answer for that.
The $40 million that would come from this 1/8 cent sales tax, that's just for operational expenses.
For VIA, that's right.
Yeah, it's not. They wouldn't be able to create any of these.
What I think the argument has been made, because I mean the linchpin of the Connect SA plan is advanced rapid transit, which would be these buses on rubber tires that are going to be on dedicated lanes. They're going to be able to move people, much more efficiently than we've seen before, if it works as planned. And the first route would go from like Stone Oak all the way down to like Brook City base. What I think people on the Connect A side have said is that we get minimal federal funding for transportation, and that if we had this operations money demonstrating that we could have a fixed route mass transit plan like it's been talked about with Connect SA, that it might liberate a few $100 million in federal funding. I mean, that's the hope. I mean, I guess we would see that it might open up, or leverage some money for San Antonio for transportation. I think that's the big question. I mean, we're going to have to see what happens with that.
Mm-hmm. It should also be pointed out that the mayor was talking about going to the legislature and asking for more authority to take out bond debt to protect the Edwards Aquifer. So it's like you're going to be paying for this in some way. You're going to be taking out debt.
Anytime I hear
that.
a big city mayor saying, we just need to go to the legislature to do that, it's like, okay, it's obscure. Yeah, I mean, like, so you're a large city, you're going to go to the Texas legislature, which, like, over the past few sessions has a pretty rotten record for urban,
I mean, you heard the tape. They hate cities and counties.
Yeah. So, like, that's just, that is diversion. I think that's all that
it reminds me a little bit of,
like,
when Elizabeth Warren came up with the Medicare for All plan, which is, it's challenging to fund on, no matter who is trying to put this together. But one of the things that she said was going to produce, part of the funding was just better wasn't it like IRS enforcement
making sure need to plug up those holes.
And I just think like over my life, I've so many things have been funded on paper with just like the IRS cracking down on people a little better. We're gonna get
we're gonna squeeze out some waste and inefficiencies.
So going to the legislature is kind of like our local version of that. The legislature is gonna pass something.
We'll get those guys because they love to hear from us.
It's just like the answer to how are we going to pay for this is take out debt. It's one answer. It's just
Well, over the weekend, I had a column kind of looking at Nelson Wolff and the fact that he kind of came out on kind of in advance of Ron Nirenberg on the whole Aquifer Protection thing, and we were always seeing examples of how he kind of like takes charge. I think recently when we had the constable who was being investigated, she indicated she wanted to run for sheriff, and then he just, I think like a couple of days later, okay, she's out. She's out. We're gonna appoint somebody new. It's just, we're not messing around here. And so that's kind of how he does things, and it's kind of an old school way of exerting power. And in working on that, his political strategist Christian Archer said to me that Nelson Wolff is the best politician ever in the city and the county. And it got me thinking, whether that's true or not. And I was thinking about it a little bit over the weekend. And so I kind of wanted to get your thoughts. If you look at people who have been major political figures.
So you want to know who we think is the best?
I'm only comfortable criticizing elected officials.
Okay, well,
and let me preface this.
So
okay, well, that's good. Let me preface this by saying we're not saying people that we necessarily agree with politically, or we're just saying people who we think were the most effective politicians or the most skilled.
Can I do another preface on this? That Christian Archer says that his client is one of the best.
But that is a good point. But also he has, he has other clients he could have mentioned too, or other past clients.
Well, I mean, Julian was his client.
There you go.
I mean, Nelson has by and large avoided scandal, has he not?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, that's an accomplishment unto itself, I think.
Well, I mean, especially if you think about the entire span of his career. You know, he was in the Texas House, the Texas Senate, City Council, mayor, county judge. Yeah.
So you got to give him that.
Yeah, like in San Antonio, that's kind of a big deal, actually. But okay, so I'll start out with, and I thought, and I came up with one guy, and yeah, he's a dude. And it's like, it can't be this guy because it's the obvious one,
right?
Henry Cisneros,
yeah.
Right. But I'm only thinking
did not avoid scandal.
He did not. Yeah, but you're right. But I'm going to say I'm not thinking about the entire span of Henry Cisneros' career. I'm thinking specifically about his election as mayor in 1981 and everything that followed from that. And you have to look at it in the context of the city of San Antonio moving from all at-large seats. This is basically when you had the business community through the Good Government League controlling everything through at-large council seats. In 1975, you moved to single-member districts. And I think Henry Cisneros' time as mayor was like a really energetic, really much needed refocusing of City Hall, not so much on what the Anglo business community wanted to see happen, but what was better for more citizens of San Antonio. I mean, this had been a time where you had entities like the San Antonio Economic Development Foundation selling the city of San Antonio across the nation as a great low-wage city. Come set up here, our workers are cheap, and by the way, they're non-union. So, Cisneros came into office as mayor, and he took a much broader approach to economic development, and he went for bigger fish. That was a big emphasis of his, and this was in the early 80s. That was a big deal at the time. I mean, it was not quite visionary, but almost there. I mean, the problem was you didn't have a workforce that was ready for it.
Right.
But he wanted something more than what we had.
He kind of pushed the biomedical industry.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And he created the San Antonio Education Partnership that started under him. That's done great things over the years. And I just think he came along at just the right time. And he was visionary in his way. And I think the reason he keeps coming up, no matter if you talk about any city issue long enough, you'll refer to Henry Cisneros, and I think that's why.
Well, I mean, to put it in perspective, when he got elected in that groundbreaking election you mentioned in 1981. We had 156,000 people turn out. That was 43% of registered voters in San Antonio. I think we were at 11% this year for the mayoral election, and that was actually considered better than we've seen in some cases. So the level of excitement that he created, I mean, I don't think it's possible that we'll ever see anything quite like that again. I was talking to you beforehand. I was going to throw like a football analogy out for anybody listening who's interested in football. I was thinking about how you have like Emmitt Smith, the all-time leading rusher in the history of the NFL, played about 14, 15 years, really solid, dependable, steady, didn't miss a game, and was just, he was just really good and really productive. But not spectacular, not necessarily exciting, but just really productive. And then you had someone like Gale Sayers back in the 60s who was electrifying, thrilling. Every time he touched the ball, what's he going to do? He had knee problems. He had a very short career, only played about 4 years. Emmitt Smith had the better career. Gale Sayers was more exciting. So do you evaluate each one at their best, or do you look at the body of work? I think if you look each one at their best, Henry Cisneros had a lot of the same skills that Nelson Wolff had as far as just being able to work the levers of government, get things done, get propositions on the ballot and get them passed. But he also had a certain level of charisma that is really rare. Yeah. And so at the peak of his career, I don't think we've ever seen anything like that in San Antonio. On the other hand, as you pointed out, Nelson Wolff, I mean, he got elected to the Texas House 49 years ago, and he's still doing it. And so the longevity, the body of work, I think. So I guess I'm copping out. I'm just saying
you are copying. Yeah, you're gonna have to choose between.
Okay, I'm gonna agree with you on Henry Cisneros but I think that
that's a cop out.
Yeah, it's a cop out. Anyway, so I'll just move this along to. Any other thoughts on this?
You have to pick now.
Oh, this is I don't like this.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty dangerous for City Hall reporter,
I hear
politics
you.
reporter to really kind of weigh in on this. But it really. There we go.
You made your podcast very uncomfortable.
Wow,
Keep
you
this
did.
all in.
Yeah. You were
keep this all in.
going to go with Michael Commander Drogo. Come on.
So now, I mean, I am interested in the longevity versus sort of like what you did with your tenure, and it's maybe because I'm the youngest one in the room, but it's kind of hard to like in sort of like dealing with sort of like the apparatus of the city, like it's hard to really kind of get past Phil Hardberger in terms of just like
That's
for
a
the
good
simple
point.
fact that he hired Cheryl Scully and Cheryl Scully kind of like reshaped the entire organization.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and he left a really strong like physical mark.
Yeah.
Downtown, wouldn't be what it is today had it not been for him. I mean, Museum Reach, that was a big lift for him.
That was big.
Main Plaza,
And-
Haven for Hope.
And also, he not only got elected 2 times, including the first one where he beat Julian Castro, the only election Castro's ever lost. But in 2008, in November of that year, he got term limit extensions passed, which I think most people thought that was going to be really difficult. And he kind of put his reputation on the line for that one. So I think that also is, it's an interesting argument.
We haven't heard from Brian.
How's your
Sorry to put you on the
phone,
spot there, Brian.
How about Henry Gonzalez?
That's there you go.
I mean, he built quite a legacy, right? I mean,
He sure
he
did.
broke barriers.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
no, that is good.
And he punched a guy at Euro Labels
Yeah,
for calling him a communist.
Yeah. He's got to get
Like
honorable
those.
mention on that
Yeah.
one. So that's a very good point. And he had he served in Congress 38 years or something like that. So very good. Okay, so I guess I was the only one who copped out, and I'll own that. On that note, we're going to wrap things up. We'll be back next week, and take care.